Denjigulidin Tobi Dindeliane and Dipon Kiruba, ne, a chicken, Bezu Hores, Nedi Majebaina, and then Anzu Chiki and Setilia Kawa Majebaje, and Diva Savina, Dibi Wangi, and then also Kawale, Nason Kawalene, and also Dendelaya, and Jigan, and Divasa, the nation, and Masongi, and Mayane Yado Mason Kiji, and it. Mondio Kovan, Toyaki, Tomato Masi, Mondio Kovan said the Jazamia could Koyaki Kalaka Chagris, Dinza, Manzugi, Dushine, Mondio Chica, Dibonki to be able to and Penny Milu, Androla Gevaina, then Milu Toy the Shindune Kalaka Bores, the Bigim the Bill Mason Dine, and the rebate Jaso, Ruby Milonwagi, me making rebate and Jasolia, and Yashin Bechaje.
Good evening. So last week we looked at how, having attained this precious human rebirth marked with 18 freedoms and endowments, it's imperative that we utilize this remarkable opportunity we've each attained to accumulate extensive virtue. And if we do not, and we end up falling into the lower realms, will be trapped in this the intense suffering of the lower realms for an immense period of time. It will be as if we cannot even hear the words higher realms. Therefore, we must strive now, whilst we have this precious human rebirth, to purify past non-virtue and refrain from any further non-virtue. Moreover, we also looked at an illustration utilizing that of a turtle to show just how very rare this precious human rebirth is. So we'll continue where we look at the great need to purify through relying on the four opponent powers. Then the 21st verse from the 4th chapter. If through the negativity of just a single instant, eons must be spent in the deepest hell of Avicii, then, due to negativity accumulated in beginningless samsara, it goes without saying one will not migrate to higher realms. Looking at the first two lines, if through the negativity of just a single instant, eons must be spent in the deepest hell of Avicii. So this refers to if someone, whether an ordinary being or a bodhisattva, gets angry at a bodhisattva, then immense negativity is accumulated. And as we know from our own lived experience, anger tends to abide for quite some period. But even if it were just for an instant, a single instant, that negativity would lead to rebirth in the hells.
Geji Jigji Digbe Yang La Du that is Geji Digba Chen Semba La Mi to Kona give in that Karma Kasha, the Chuja, Nima Kasha, in the Horsawa in the Digba Chimbu Yin, but is what Yang said. Mase, Dimase and Bendigo Karma Chik Kasha Chik really at the name Kona give ina, Digba Chimusagi to us. Says that Diba Sawa Geji Yang said that Dili Chawa Jen that you know that you. In
the first line, if through the negativity of just a single instant. So the inclusion of the term just is to show that something as minor as just a single instant leads to such a negative outcome. So therefore, there's no question that if one is angry for longer than just a single instant, the negativity accumulated will be immense.
Gazeba the Nigris and Bautumia Basso, Gawa, Jangu Bautumia, and a Manga Solid, Ninga, Nemere, Gage in the Duano, near what is what the Gawa Name Nikunas.
This non-virtuous cause, this mind of anger, when that cause ripens as a propelling imprint, will lead to rebirth in the deepest hell, the hell of relentless torment, Avicii. And there one will have to abide for eons, not for a brief rebirth, but for an extensive, protracted period of time, suffering immensely.
Din Dibasaba di Devo de la Kawaki was in Kiwachima, Nason Maki, the Yawama, Din Maki, and Yundian and Lenching Mayamba, Jang Mambu, Lucy Kiwachi Lenche, and the Dele Adese, Duanua Chago, as that is what they need.
So briefly, these two lines point that if one is angry towards a bodhisattva, this is clearly greatly non-virtuous. And to make this abundantly clear, it's stated if one were angry for just an instant, just a mere moment, then that the strength of that non-virtue would lead to eons of suffering in the worst of hells. So how much more so then if one is angry for a protracted period?
Simba Corner Sawa, you Tisan Simba Corner of Corner di Dibache, Chagora, Simba Main Bajil Corner Sawa, Diba de Chua, Chagora, and Dina Shinga Zugeda, that Simba member in a Sosulia, Tingi Gabu, Tin Chimbo, Ralia, getting Chimbo, Pama di Gila Corner Savana, Dibache, Dimen Bigeda, Mishan, Azulia, Chanda, Zalia, Jito, Jeramatic and Dilla Corner Diba Chua, the Kajile. Ralia, Jin Chimbo, and getting Chimbokazi, Imbachilia, Corosana Dibache. Just as you sembala, Corosana Dibache, your Harrison, Jayu Semba said the Simjan Tam Dondalia, Simjan Tamji Dunga Seada, Simjan Tamji Digi Dondala, and the Samlotaje, and the Janlia Pembe Jawajanya, Dubu Inza, Denigi Jig Simjan Tamjela Pando to Gilia, the Corosavan, then Dibachimasago, like. Yudi, Masiki, Gachimo, Pandochimo, Zachimo, Simja Tamjela Pando chicken jinza, and Delia Corson and Divat, Chess, I guess, Chimbosagri,
The distinction is being made here about anger towards a bodhisattva. And anger towards a bodhisattva is incredibly non-virtuous. And this is because of the incredible motivation, the incredible kind heart of a bodhisattva. This is a being who wants to benefit all beings without exception. And whilst the bodhisattva will gladly help beings in minor ways, they have their hearts set on helping beings in the most important, most beneficial of ways, leading them to enlightenment. So this is the most remarkable of beings. Therefore, being angry at such a being accumulates incredibly powerful non-virtue. When one is angry at a non-bodhisattva, of course this is non-virtuous, but not nearly as much negativity is created because of the quality of the mind of the being towards whom one is angry. But amongst ordinary beings, there are those for whom being angry towards them still creates immense non-virtue, not as much as a bodhisattva, but more than most others. And this comes down to how much kindness they've shown to you and how much benefit they bring into your life. So here one would think most clearly of one's parents. So if one is angry at one's parents, immense negativity is also created, not nearly as much as when towards a bodhisattva, because of the quality of the motivation of the bodhisattva who holds in their heart all beings. But a bodhisattva holds you, a parent holds you, their dear child, in their heart. Therefore, anger towards them is much greater than just to another ordinary being.
이제나 펜버로 최바로 표비네야 전유sem발라 샨다 전유sem발 멤버질로 초표에다 전유sem발로 초표나 대수남스 체사고로 그래서네 전유sem발 세디 sem전 탐지일이야 된다 두겐 야침부시우지 능인자 될려 초표나 네 개와 체와다 디 멤버에다 전유sem발 멤버질이야 주도신 초표나 됐어 개와 총알 이제 개와 체사다 개와 체와서 디바 체사고로 디 개와 제나 개와 체 초표나 될려 펜버tum나 네 쳐봐 디부 개와체제 네버기나 디부 쳐와라지 그래서 되게 그래서 곧 시행이야 판도도 곧 판도 쳐와 이제 뒤로와 그냥 저기 뒤로와데 강부직 날에 미지게 강부에 로드 매버 쇠샤반에 샤반에 그 예바시 당기로와 올로 매바서 그 이나 집이 그 로가도 매버 쇠샤반에 그 예바체 당기로와 그래서 집이 로가 매바서 망고지로 경을하고 와 강바찌기나 미치기 강바찌기 로메바서 미치기 내게 마도 탐질 누고 말봐 디기 고 예바 중어와 디나 신이제다 고 전시선발은 녀샤바 녀샤바는 샘진 망고질이야 진 잘내는 거 봐서 판도 두고서 디기 찐지 전에다 고 디버체사 그래서 판바도나 델리아 초페나 아니 개와체 디부 디네고 콘르스키 시스템 때문에 디버체와 디네기 전시선발 sometimes 제소이랑 배야고 했으면 제소이랑 some 기지 잠지 개변에 편연 받는 거 봐서 책으로 받아 또나 두 책으로 와.
Bodhisattvas, being such remarkable beings, in dependence on them or in our interactions with them, we can create strong negativity, but also great virtue. This is because of the power of their mind. They become an incredibly powerful object in terms of our interactions with them, produce powerful karmic seeds, either virtuous or non-virtuous. So if making offerings to a bodhisattva, for example, making offerings to a bodhisattva accrues so much more merit than to an ordinary being. So on both sides of the ledger, one can create either extensive virtue or non-virtue in relation to a bodhisattva because of the quality of their mind. For example, if one, for some strange reason, decided to cut the electrical wires going to a particular house, then that would be a non-virtuous thing to do because one would be acting in a way so that that home was without electricity. But if one were rather to destroy a power station, that would have so much worse impact, and therefore would be a more non-virtuous deed to do. Likewise, with how we relate to a bodhisattva. Either we can, by getting angry at a bodhisattva, accrue extensive non-virtue, or by making offerings towards or rejoicing in the qualities of a bodhisattva, so much merit can be accumulated. So there's a parallel between a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva and a moment of rejoicing in the qualities of a bodhisattva have an outsized result.
ko thoma me ba ne dibo mo shu sa yo da nga so ge da nya wa dibo pa to me ba sa yo was je san thome ko ba sa di is je san dibo pa to me ba de sa de yo des za de ne gi dibo de ma sha ba ina ngo zu shi ba de ma sha ba je yin bo dian je pa ma sha ba shi ba ina ane ga wa du gu re se ne dian zhuo ji ge ma des dian zhuo mi zhuo mo chi go se dian zhuo mi zhuo dian zhuo ma ge wa ji ngan zhuo ma du gu re es de ngan zhuo zhuo ya la ade xie gu ya yo ma sin ji da zhu mo ji gu se de yin ji mi ji zhu re se wo da de ne ge di ba de ma sha ba je xi ba yin na da de ne ge ngan zhe ge dian zhuo mi ge wa je ngan zhuo ma ge de ta che ba de se wo da.
The verse continues. Then, due to negativity accumulated in beginningless samsara, it goes without saying, one will not migrate to higher realms. So this makes reference to lives previous to this, where so much non-virtuous imprints accumulated in lives previous to this, those imprints still abide on our continuum. So if we don't utilize this opportunity we have to purify our mind through relying on antidotes, should any of those non-virtuous imprints ripen at the time of death, they can only lead to rebirth in the lower realms.
Dine zada di dandala karasungoro sene jesa nga janju sempa la ane kiji samyi dipa jeban konda jeban dipa saba di nyawal ba nga sol pato meba nyungu na ta nga zulia ko thoma meba ni dipa pato meba sa sha yoro di za ndigi ane nga sol ma je chine ane nya dunga pato meba nyungu ya du yungu ro was sagir was yungu was sedi dandala nga sol jeba de ju mi ge wa sa ba na mi ge wa de la de je bu nga sol ji ge se sungo ro da.
In this verse, we see that just a mere moment of negativity directed towards a bodhisattva accumulates immense negativity, and this can only lead to suffering results, and if it propels a rebirth, can only be a rebirth in the lower realms.
yu dipa saba na jebu nga son le jigiri se de ma sung sawe che la ta du shu la kar ding or sen je san yu nga son dipa saba de la de nga so jigyo ba na ta nga son le ge ge de ba yo ma re nga son le ge ba na du nga nyung ko re je sa du nga nyung ge de ba yo ma nga so den zhe le ge je di ji ko wa wa je sa de ba me ba na nga son ge ge me sa ba na je sa te che de le da de nga so la du xue tang ngo ga ya ko ye ba de le ya nimbe top shi ko ni dipa de sha ko re dipa sha ba yin na de dipa da ru dipa da ba ni yu me ba cha so na nga so le ki ma re je sa nga so ki ma re je sa de do shi ne nga so ki ma de yin za ane nga so ma ge na ne ge wa jin ling ko ga wa ling ko sen din den rol ki ro wa den rol ki re je sa nga so ki ma de den rol ki re de ne yin za ba nga so tab lam kar yo ra se ne nga zo ki den de le ya du su dang ko ga ya ko yu be den de le ya da den ko ga je be zu je dipa di nimbe top shu ko ne sha ko re so da nimbe top shu ko ne dipa sha yo de di nimbe ge wa ju yo ge wa di gi nga so den do ge yu ju go ro wa je sa nimbe top shu ko ne dipa sha ko je sa de le ya sem ba me ma ta sem ba me nyo mo cho so ma da wa che sem ba yu de en sem ge yu cho so da zu ba yu de je na ma zo ji dipa di nimbe top shu ko ne sha ko re se du su go da da nimbe di re da chi chi di.
Then the implicit meaning of this verse is recognizing that I do not want to suffer. I must thereby make the most of this opportunity to ensure that I prevent the possibility of falling into the lower realms. And to do so, I must both bring an end to the accumulation of new non-virtue and purify past non-virtues. And the way to do that is to rely on the skillful method of the four opponent powers. Through relying on the four opponent powers, I'll purify I'll both purify past negativities and accumulate virtue, thereby closing the door to rebirth in the lower realms and creating causes for rebirth in the higher realms. So now, whilst I have this opportunity, this remarkable rebirth, all the qualities required, I should utilize it well, not let it go to waste. And through relying on the virtuous mind of conscientiousness, I must apply the 4 opponent powers, thereby accumulate virtue, purify non-virtue, and ensure ongoing excellent rebirths.
아니 디 제고 나솔 기그레스 제자다 규디 매바 쇠바나 나솔 기기 말레스 제자다 규디 매바서도 님보도 주고네 샤요도 안주 개화사고레스 제자 디 개화디 제고 가와 용거스는 개화 침마다 만주 시르데 긴기고르다 나솔 기에디 규디 매바 쇠사와서 제고 용하여 말와 다 가와 기고선 딘돌레 기고레스 제자 규래 되네 개화사발이나 아니 디기 제고 개화디 나솔 딘돌레 개화린 거레스 제산 균제기 덴제 세티야 보투에 차고들이야 규라티네 규야고쳐바나 델라티네 제고 야고치용고 바다 규 아니 남바 디볼사바나 델라티네 제고 동안요아리 용고 바디 다지기 두신세디 규라티네 제고리 규라티네 용고 바디 두신 삼다네 균제제 균제기 덴제 세다 삼다요 바디다네.
Here we see this linking to topics we've covered well previously. From causes which are non-virtuous, these, when they ripen into a rebirth, can only lead to rebirth in the suffering lower realms. And if one eliminates such causes, one will lack the cause to be reborn in the lower realms, which means one will necessarily be reborn in the higher realms. And the way to eradicate the previous non-virtuous imprints on our continuum is to rely on the method of the 4 opponent powers. So here our attention is turned towards dependent arising, in particular dependency on causes. From virtuous causes, happiness follows. From non-virtuous causes, suffering follows. So here our attention turns towards dependent arising, in particular dependency on causes.
이사다님 가지고 디바샤이드 님보도 쇼코네 샤스 도스치나가 삼다이로 와다가지 도스치나 소소라는 게 소소 하고와 디바사와티 하고와티게 바제 제다 하모웨네다 예마디네기 디바 몽보사 요레 선베 삼다제 제자 디베 노르리 다 중디하고 말에 디베 노르리 선베게다 삼다치다 안나 몽바나데 몽바나다 디바 유네 지금에 선베게다 domsemje chiruada jesa dawo yago yomara sambade gyesem chagruwa jesa da mo bane chinjinenge zawgine jigme sembe samdaba da domsem chagruwa domsem chagda di yembo ni de gyesem da domsem ni de chagruwa da tingi dopsede da tingi dopdele ya anjinga joge gemje konjo sum tingi dop chagire ndimen bege janjo sem da dongbani da jamni je no dongbani de dobul cheratigi ya tingi dop chagruwa 제가 되게 삼단데 다딩이 디바디 야 디링한 델야 인gem요 건조 숨기 뒤헬이야 바샤기 샘비기 되게 마저사 답제 디바 되게 샤기 샘비 샘딩네 디바 샤리게 dimbajeje 되네 디바 샤이게 된다라 되네 이제 건조 숨 잼로 접수 줘야다 되네 샘비야 담제야 잠바데 니죠 검야 되네 공바이나 되네 공비 로디다 저기 님베도 차르고 봐 제가 잠 니죠 검야 gemroje야 되네 저기 그제 건조다 접수 전에야 즉 최고 부야라서 받아 차지야라서 받아 나사바 가르치면 디제바디다 님베도 차로 제자디 두신이 제디당 저기 님보도 쉬고네 샤세디 다 돌돌 시전에 디너로다.
So to present the 4 opponent powers then briefly. Here the order in which one generates is not fixed, generates them is not fixed, it's as you feel appropriate. So one can start by recalling past negativities. And here it's important to call to mind both what one can actually remember, as well as calling to mind things that one would have certainly done, even if one has no recollection of doing it, because in lives previous to this, one would have engaged in such non-virtues. So one generates regret for such non-virtue, recognizing both the harm that we possibly cause to others, as well as the suffering awaiting for us because of those imprints on our mind. So we generate regret, and thereby, and to make that regret strong within us, we recall, we remind ourselves of harm we've caused to others, as well as the suffering that awaits us. Thereafter, one can generate, so that would be the power of regret, then one can generate the power of restraint, where one makes, or the power of the promise, where one commits to restraining one's mind from engaging in such activities again. So one makes a promise, I will not repeat such non-virtuous behavior. So that could be the second of the four opponent powers, the power of regret followed by the power of restraint. Then one can generate the power of reliance. So the power of reliance refers to the two minds that one relies on in order for one's spiritual development. Explicitly, one's purification, but also one's accumulation. So the power of reliance is where we rely on the three jewels, so one generates the mind of refuge. And as this is a Mahayana practice, one also generates bodhicitta. So these two, refuge and bodhicitta, are what we rely on. Recognizing that what we've regretted is contrary to the advice or the teachings, so contrary to the three jewels, it's also contrary to the intent of bodhicitta. So here we generate the third opponent power, that of reliance. And then finally, the fourth is the power of the antidote. And the power of the antidote is any virtuous mind that you feel drawn to. It could be further meditation on refuge. It could be further meditation on bodhicitta. It could be engaging in something physical, such as making offerings or prostrations and so forth. So this then is the fourth opponent power, that of the antidote.
디지기 안에 가서래 디바디마 니고 총탄거 배나가 디로아 둘로 롬바로 차되네 롬바데 까미알에 니말 까모로와 니마데 가제 슈체나 조아 까모로와 니마데 슈춘주마도 맨에 게레마데 까모로와 니마 맨나 까모도마로와 디나시 나도 셈나려야 지금 아주 디바데 가와서 아주 삼로 디지게 삼로 셈나래 바차 예데바데 지나다 셈텔이야 개와데 가제 톱체로 직 사투베네 곰투베네 디 셈딩이 디바디마 요아메가 세투야다 아직 충주마도 제마도나 중주 글리마도 사마도 차고라 진짜 디네자다 베나 지게 장유셈 곰야다 동반이 두베 셰라로서바다 잠니지 콤바다 개와 또 채워자 디기 디바디 요아샤투야다 근데 아직 잠니지게 토네 삼네 메바 지금 메바제 디니게다 건조스마 접수트베 점로 직제베나 디바 디니게 점로 사지제는 아주게 개발을 두베네다 디바샤고리네다 장유셈 곰바도 동반이 또 비셔로 곰바 나신지 마디바디 마좀 두요 말 그래서 내가 만 년보 니말 마서나 그 축체충은 아니 개발셔로 와디 나신다 제가도 don다라 나도 셈디 기초를 야네 야도 야네 섬담바이네 그 년마 디바사시게디 디바디 총슈루어다
For one's purification, to fulfill one's hopes, in other words, to be effective, it's imperative that you engage with the purification with conviction. Because if we ask ourselves, where are these non-virtuous imprints that we are wanting to purify? Well, they are found on our consciousness, on our continuum. Therefore, their antidotes need to be consciousnesses. This means when engaging in the practice of purification, these four opponent powers, one needs to engage with, cultivate them or generate them in a way that is heartfelt, is sincere. Because if, for example, one just generates the power of regret through a mere recitation, whilst there's some purpose to this, but because the mind is not deeply engaged, actual regret has not arisen, the purification that will follow will be weak, will be superficial. Similarly, when one comes to the process of refuge and bodhicitta, for this opponent power of reliance to serve its purpose of purifying the mind, one needs to generate bodhicitta, generate refuge. Then it has the power to deeply purify. Likewise with the power of the antidote. Again, if one merely recites something or goes through steps of a meditation, it's not that this is of no use, it's just very superficial. The change to the negativity in our continuum will be minor. Whereas if one meditates well on, for example, emptiness or on bodhicitta or on refuge, then one will purify significantly more. So in brief, because it's non-virtuous imprints that we are wanting to purify, the way this is done through the four opponent powers is to try and generate these minds in a way that is powerful, that is heartfelt. Then purification happens.
이상 디네기 당한주 넘기네 다 개화를 사회 되는 무주시 님의 다와로 지금 한주게 가든 예주시에다 개화 주야 되 님의 다와 무주시 어직 아직 삼질이 님이 직진이 바 숙주무제 아직 무주제선 직냐 다와가 시기네 맞아 샤샤베네 대대에 되 수주 맞아요. 지나는 그디 강은 제바데 무주제기디나 직제베나 야디 무주제여도 야디 누버친 보라지 누버 디거로 가서는 그디나 제여도 거기 야고 차고로 와 개화들 그디나 레디가서 차고로 와 되는 이상 두스 차고로 와다.
The second key component, the first was to actually engage fully with one's mind. The second key component is to engage in these practices continuously or regularly. Because you've heard this many times in terms of accumulating virtue. This is something we need to do extensively, we need to do repeatedly, not sporadically. So too with purification. Because they work in the same way, in that one is trying to develop new wholesome habitual tendencies and break unwholesome habitual tendencies. To bring this about requires continuous effort. If one, for example, engages in retreat and one feels some benefit arising, but then the retreat is done and one goes on with one's life and does nothing else for months, well, one will then have imprints on one's mind. One's mind will not change. One will remain as before. So therefore, there are these two key components. The one is to actively, sincerely engage in generating their consciousnesses that are the four opponent powers, and secondly, to do so regularly on a daily basis.
Yeah, that in my desam kona nyongyurne dene number migurde didar dine nyonshindu diwashenda rabtu kies.
Then the 22nd verse, merely experiencing that alone will not bring complete escape, for whilst it is being experienced, additional negativities will be strongly produced.
The dibu the young char, dibu means then Ajang Tendril Gigwas or some Gigwas at Clever. There's some Kona young urnes. Says that the niggas is that there's some Kone young urnes, the Yama dibu Sasha Badi, man and Ansol Gage, dibu the debu the pa young sana, then debu the young, the Dunga young savana, and the jelly that Gargi is in the Tendril Gigwas and other some Dennis, something the Corsic was, the younger was or that.
here Shantideva is challenging a doubt one may have, a get out clause that one thinks one may have found, which is that, well, I've created non-virtue, but I know when an imprint is ripened, it is exhausted, and then it's gone. So if I fall to the lower realms, yes, it'll be horrendous, but it will end. When that imprint that has sent me to the lower realms is exhausted, it will end, and therefore I will once again gain rebirth in the higher realms. So here what is being challenged is the mistaken assumption that when one falls to the lower realms, when that propelling imprint is exhausted, one will gain rebirth in the higher realms thereafter.
Desam Kone Yona, Denegi, Dustim, Jeza, Diva Saja, Diva di Diwango, Nasoni Yawale, Nasongi Dindel, Dunga Yon in Yaget Dindri Kirwas and Kirwalamna, Adeticale Cabures, Dene number Namtar Migurtes, and Denegi, Nasoni Gine, Denegi Tarchin Ya, Casore, Dendrule Kies at Becale Cabures, Dene Namtar Migurtes, Koyu Dunga, Nasung Dungale, Tarchin, Dele Tarchin Ya. And in general, get two days at the get two mare, migurtes, gig mares, calicahures.
Look at the first two lines. Merely experiencing that alone, so that's what's just been covered, will not bring complete escape. So, in other words, it is not going to happen that once that imprint is exhausted, then one's rebirth in the lower realms is done, and rebirth in the high realms will be followed. That is not going to come about.
That is never need the Gumzeshi or that is a matter of Gumza Karelamna, Didder Dini, Yoshindu, Devotion Aratuki, said Didder Dini, Kamate, Targamaris, Gumzan Karelamna, Didder Dini, Yoshindos, and Anson again, and Anson at Dendelia, Dunga, Yoshin Bicablia, and Gawasai the Begalahores, Gawasavana, George, Mother Satumares, says and Gawasai the Galahawashures, or that, did in your shindu. And then Divasai in a bear bottom of Satures, says that Divasai in a deeper bottom of Satures, says and Dinipa Divashanda, Yamagi, Divasai, Debu, Nova in a Divashanda, Savaki Sashins, Nansung Dindelia, Diva Saba Sashi, Saba bottom of a raptor city. Bottom by Sagore, D is a Kingi, Tiba Digi Tibutia, Nason Kivalent.
So the first two lines presents makes a statement to dispel that doubt or to challenge that doubt. Merely experiencing that alone will not bring complete escape. Now, in the third and fourth line, reasons are presented. For whilst it is being experienced, additional negativities will be strongly produced. This is because when one falls to the lower realms and is suffering intensely, whilst one is suffering intensely, it's incredibly difficult to accumulate virtue. And whatever virtue one may be able to accumulate will be weak. But non-virtue is easy to accumulate whilst experiencing intense suffering. So therefore, whilst one is being tormented in the lower realms, one is creating predominantly causes for further rebirth in the lower realms.
Diva Mashana Gaya Marsembe, some Dagio Madi, some Dade Noturies, Cesar Diki to the Kalahoshindu and the Kalahavo, Imbi, Jumza Gare Lamna, Nason Italia, Dunga, Patomeva Nodu, and Delia and Dipania Saba Mongo Sagiries, Gavan Savasai, the Pecombure, Kalahoshuries, Cesar Diba Mongo Savasai, Gavan Yamai Diba Saji, David Minsava in there, said that then Delia Diba Saba Mongo Side, Dibudia Dunga. Dividi Duanongoro, and so Kihor watch it, do in Gora, the Pentarako Shure, so Geneza, the nigger some Matawache, Dine some Dagiamaches, Dinesa, do in the Tarako Mikim some Tane, that didn't under Tin, then you million top Janazuya, the nigger Yamlinchi, Kohob, Yubit, Cap Delia, Nan the Bezu, JJ, same Bame, Madame Bame, or the Madame watch, same Bayet, the Dipon Gerupcia, the Getchimushuries, that didn't Yamne Yapoche Tumna, Capsaris, 단 되게 고급라 배야 고디 고고디 취재 마다와 진념의 제고를 해서 너는 인부디 순거다.
So the meaning of the 22nd verse in brief is that do not deceive yourself, do not believe that just when the non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint that sends us to the lower realms, when that is exhausted, that you will be immediately reborn in the higher realms because that imprint is now exhausted. Whilst it's true that imprint will be exhausted, whilst in the lower realms, you will accumulate extensive further non-virtue. And not only that, but there will still be a mass of non-virtuous imprints on your continuum from previous lives. Therefore, the likelihood of being reborn from the lower realms quickly is almost non-existent. So now, whilst one has the opportunity to radically transform the trajectory of your future lives, embrace this opportunity, rely on conscientiousness, and transform your way of thinking.
난도나라 디식진이디 가서 삼당하로 지간에스당 고고레스 담나지 냠는 가서 시고레스 제수시발라 챔비언 하우스라 삼당하를 레고로다 도수 삼당 고고레스 간에 삼당 고고레스네 다 전유심발이야 기지직 잠지 코르사와나 디기 디바디기 빼 징야와라 계정아서 동아 빠도메 바 용구여베나 다 진행한 저 까와 빠도메 바네 차가 토마메 바네 디바사시비 디바빠도메 바 사주어레 제산데 디바디 디기긴디 디바디 마샤바 있나다 데 마샤바 샤샤바네 데니 디기가 손을 바기와레 게게라도 게르고레스 제자 냐제 덴톨릭 기가 말가 손 디고가 손 기그레스 제데 도스키고레스 데네자 안데 디제 데네 덴자데 디바딘지 미치 샤고도 셈베 삼다야다 안디마제 오기 삼다야데 제자 당 손을 끼어베네 나사비 디바디 디부 다지 야장 덴톨릭 기투구로 와서 안디 덴야 개와도 치고라 삼바이나 디안깔레 하고시고레스 도시네 가르스네 나서에 땡레 개바이나 땡 개와도 연에 깔레 하고레 지사 데 개와 디버바도 메바 사바 디버바도 메바 사이고 지사 디 디바디 왕게 가서 기르고레 지사 다 가서 디링 디네자다 디네게 디버 사바인자 가서 기게나 디발 직 디바디데 도시네 김세 삼단 디부이 제보 가서 기게요 바다 디바디 야네 야도 가서 때네 디버 사바사 디긴 가서 기게요 바 두삼다네 두삼다다 가서 탈카고시고 진바데 삼다이도 어다 디링 땡텔이야 고비디 갑리야 땡긴비 제제제 안 디방아사시 디바디파 샤지 님보도 주고네 샤 얘네 아니 개와 투비스 제산 개와 투투지 심비다 베제제네 아제 디봉케도 제고레서 제산 셈바미가 왔다 셈바미마 어느 마다시도 아저 지금 유네다 소소이 세디 잠기 디기다 세디 도교 주비하다 세디 잠기 가서 나 참여하데 되게 바 개와 균에서 마다와제 둔 샤샤제 두스마다와제 안셈면 지게 소수게 바위에 땡제 개와 주주고 냠면 제고레 사실 거다.
Shantideva here is talking to us explicitly, trying to shake us awake, to recognize the opportunity we have, but the peril of not utilizing it well. And he does so firstly by reminding us that even a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva creates causes that will lead to intense suffering for an inconceivable number of lifetimes in the lower realms. So therefore, now, refrain from further non-virtue and purify past non-virtue through relying on the four opponent powers. And furthermore, Shantideva is saying to us, and don't deceive yourself saying, oh, it's okay, when that imprint is exhausted, once again, I'll be reborn in the higher realms. That is not going to happen. Rather, one will continue in a downward trajectory, remaining trapped in the lower realms, suffering intensely. So therefore recognize and embrace this opportunity you have to accumulate virtue and purify non-virtue and rely on conscientiousness so as not to follow the mind of distraction that's so drawn to this life's temporary minor pleasures and this mind that's being so repulsed by this life's minor problems. Lift your view to lives beyond this and strive for what is important.
That in it odd ma and did it the one year Dagi Gego Majena, Dile Luba Shem made, Dile Moban Shem made horses.
Then Shantideva continues on the 23rd verse. Having attained such freedom, if I do not habituate myself to virtue, there is no greater self-deception than this. There is no greater confused ignorance than this.
That another on the Danchugitin Rimbochi Toba Tintelia, Gawa Comje, Tibon Kiru Gawaya, which to Madubenda, Yongshu Regores, as soon as another.
So in brief, the meaning is that now that we have this opportunity, if we don't fully embrace it, it's just such a loss.
Didi Dawani Yune, Didi Dawani Yune, Dagi Kigo Majena, Cesan Didi Sidan Zuge, Dawaketa, George Sabi, Ludian Cabaret, Dien Delia, and Chiki Tarbata, Tamji Kimpi, Gobon, Kare, Trune, Trubi, Gus Trubne, to Tuyoba, Dene, and the chicken around Luding Chane, Rangun and Tunye. Digi Chasan Tsawa, Shen Yungene Yasosula, Chu Dinga Yoba, Chu Yoba, Tunga Chasan Tsaniba, Chesa Dinigi, and Tunga Chasan DJ Sideda, and Dawaketa, Joa Ju, the Nigi Yunden, Kichu Chasan Tsanzibi, Dina Tsandibi, that Din, Kabajan, that the top to your race, Didi Dawa Nigunes, that on the top to your race, or that.
Tikang Chika.
No.
So looking at the first line, having attained such freedom. Freedom here refers to the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments we've all achieved. So here we must recognize how truly fortunate we are, how rare and precious this opportunity is. This is not an ordinary life. We have all the required inner and outer conditions, all 18 freedoms and endowments. This is a life to be utilized fully.
Zanda Tendelia, on the Gewachima, on the Koban Toyagi, Toye Chido, the Yutuagi, and the Dingondio Koban, Yutum, Satu Yoba, Tugore, the Neane, Tarbio Koban Toyagi, Kuridunga Tadal Treasure, Tarbio Koban Toyagi, Usana Sa, Gewa Tuna to Tugore, and Semja Tamjaki, and Sanjo Koban Toy Chido, and this Gason Yamnji Gewa Tuna to Tugores, the Ina to Tugo Dine Madubache, and Dagi Gego Majena, Denigida, Jesa Denigi Din Cabajan de la Dini Yamlin Jena, 2 yor, the Denigi Majevachin, Tuna, Denig Majevaje, Gewa, Dagi Gego Majena, Gewachimo, on your Goma to be Chido, Lam Yamlin Majeba, Denigawa Majuba, Tarbedo Goma to be Chido, and Garsori. The Gibutin, the Tumo Lam Yidimbasa Chagrod, Denigil Lam Lomajaba. Then the Simja Tamji San Yokoban to be Chido and Cabachim, Yamlin Majeba ina. Then Lucine, Majebana, Dinigi, Dagi Gego Majena, or Dinigi, Majena, this or Dine Majeba ina, Zade.
Looking at the first 2 lines, having attained such freedom, if I do not habituate myself to virtue. So here with the term habituate, we see what's been referred to earlier, the need to habituate ourselves to virtuous ways of thinking and break our habituation to non-virtuous ways of thinking through relying on the 4 opponent powers. So independence on the freedom we've attained, the freedom to engage in the Dharma through having all the required inner qualities such as intelligence, as well as the outer conditions such as a spiritual teacher. This is a life we should strive to accumulate the causes that will ensure further excellent rebirths. Moreover, we have an ideal foundation to even develop causes to gain freedom from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. This is something possible for all of us. And independent on that, we can even develop the causes for full and complete Buddhahood. This is what we should strive to do.
Denigi Majeba in the Denigi J, Gob Yoba, Tungan Sawa Delia, Denigi Majeba in the Karchiris and Dile Luba Shem Medes. Dele Nanzolia, Gohor Chembushu, Tigo, the Dile Labig, Gohor Tea Yomares, Dile Lubas and Nanzo Gohor, Gohor Teba, Gohor Tigo, Dine Gohor Teba, dile luba, dini gogo shiu, gogo chimbo shiu tiki wares, dile labi gogo teje yo ma les, dile luba shenme des.
But if we don't do that, if we fail to habituate ourselves to virtue, the third line, there is no greater self-deception than this.
지난다 luba se de gogo tangwa se di da range rang gogo tangwa so chego, range rang gogo tangwa dile da pe karasene dile luba shenme dile gogo tangwa chimbo chiyo chili dile chaji yo jan yo ma les de. 지난다 안 저기 디기 주비에게 디기 또 약속 당한 저기 나도 고야디 디기리 모야디 동아리 지나 디기디 뭐 땡기 대화 안탈바다 템지기 보고 와 토비야다 아니 내가비 대화 라다 미고 와 토긴 땡데레 디기야디 디기로 와다 지나 디 두비에게 규딜이야 아주 규 마주바제 셈밤에 온도 따제 되네기 개와디 마지바제 배 소소랑기 고가 나와서 최고래 지나 dimpenanga sem bame ondo taedu gewa duma jubade goha tawa so chegore jisan rangi lubare deja dele luba laba shen kaya marsidida manze degi tardu degi de tarba tamji gibo goba degi dile laba kaya mewa barwa jisan da kowal samdana kowe nelia degi lada mi degi dile laba de kowe degi yo marwa jisan dim mewaza di degi duwe gudi manze masaba inza dele manze denige 유사에 고급 유예되버 찍을이야 소소한 게 심밤에 밤에 온도 땅제 체티 sem게 자와로 줍지 되니게 개와 마루바이나 제사다 소소한 게 고가 땅 말에 딜려 고가 체바지도 요 말에서
There is no greater potential self-deception than this, because when we have come to gain an understanding of why this human rebirth is so precious, we have an understanding of its great value. And we also have an understanding that our underlying motivation for all that we do is the wish for happiness and the wish to be freed of suffering. And having gained some understanding of the Dharma with the understanding of what the actual causes for happiness are and the actual causes for suffering, if we then don't embrace those, accumulate extensive virtue, purify non-virtue, what a waste. There's no one cheating us out of this opportunity but ourselves. If we do not look beyond the happiness and the pleasures and the tribulations of this mere life, if we do not recognize our true potential, such a loss, and no one will be deceiving us or cheating us other than ourselves.
ānā, yīne, dīle mōngpa shēnmē dōsa, dā chēsā dā mōngpa, mā shīngpa, mōngpa, nēsū lēngi yé nāmi mā shīngpa, bēne dā kiawa chū kuwa dā, dā dīpa pōng kuwa dī, bēne lāngchā dā dōrshā, mā shīngpa, mōngpa, dīle lāwa chikāyā mā rēs. Chēsā dā ngānsu kuwa dī dīgī rī wāchā, dīgī dī dēwā chōdu kuwa dī dā, ngānsu kuwa thārpa tamchī kīpī kuwa dī dīgī dī rē. That's Kovel sometime no Kole matter by no Kovi digidi, Mondio Govandi, and the Devati, Dile Hava, di body Hamoaje, di Topja by Yahuimba Hamoa, and then di Yamsul Leg, Yoag, Gudi Samatubaina, Samatuba Jeda, Lanya Pangbi, Casa Langbi, and then Lang Machimba. Just not a Pangue, the Anzulia Chick Moe Dungade, just that Dungade. 만주게 미델레 둥어요레 딜레 타바 둥어 채와데 나소메 텔라 둔두에 텔라 이다다 녜베 텔라데 둥어 지레지 둥어 채와데 강가 채야야 채고레 지산 디니게 강가 채와 빵고바데 하모고데 디요에 유 디바디게 빵마신 바지 지산데 디바다 디바 빵마신 바 게와 냠술레 마신 바데 다 물랑돌기 네 마신 바레 몽바레 딜레 몽바 타바지 가요 마 딜레 몽바 두아 가요 마레 해서 딜레 몽바 셴메도 왔습니다.
The verse concludes with, there is no greater confused ignorance than this. So this then, we come to recognize that having all this knowledge, that we understand what it is that we need to adopt and what it is we need to abandon, but not applying ourselves to adopting these wholesome ways of thinking and abandoning unwholesome ways of thinking. This is such a state of such confused ignorance. We have this knowledge, but we leave it it remains merely intellectual. We don't cultivate it within. That we even have an understanding that the actual happiness we long for is lasting, stable happiness that's not punctuated by any suffering. And this is the happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And that is attainable. But not applying ourselves to that, this is deeply sad. And moreover, recognizing that whilst the attainment of such great goals may be a way off, those causes can be accumulated now, as well as the causes for rebirth in the higher realms. Not applying ourselves to that. This is just a state, a reflection of our own confused ignorance, because we have an understanding of the required causes. So at the very least, we need to apply ourselves to close the door to falling to the lower realms and set our goals on something beyond this life. Set the happiness we're striving for to be something beyond this life. The problems we're looking to overcome, not merely those of this life.
원dio 고방 토의 주도 아니 지 토고 선비 원dio 고방 돈이 준비 군에 라제 원dio 고방 토의 유 당은 님들 냠는 제 개와 줍줍세디 원dio 고방 개와 치마 당은 줄래 지게 대기 원도 탈바다 탐제 기묘 고방 토의 냠는 지기 띵 개바진 원dio 고방 토고도 개와 치마니나야 세델라 양하는 냠는 지기 세델레 탈바다 탐제 기묘 고방 토모디에 무디지 냠는 제 토의기 띵 개바진 원dio 고방 토고도 선비 디니기 군이라제 저게다 진비 냠내지야다 추림소야다 서버콤야 다 전제 좀야 소속의 기초주의에 개어주의에 되우시에 안디 내래 타바 삼다베나다 코유가서 동안 코와 딜레 탈제 탈비 고마 토구 선비 군이라제 디던달라다 진바다야 추림소야 서버콤야 제와 부야라서 개와냠 주야제 디네 디마제다 심전 탐제 라다라와 지벌 심전 탐제 코유 동안을 줘제 산유고파 토고도 디인장의 심전 탐제 된다 네 탈비고파를 매 꾸기 디인자당의 심전 탐제 산유고파 토라 지인 선비게 전주 선비 군내라지다 진바다야 출무소야 서버고며 전주쯤야라 소바다 소소의 개와 강rum나 루신의 개와 강도도 두고 그래서 다가지 다등하는 주게 된주 유리된 된들라 되네요 고가 청년 차상 차디와 고가 야고 여바리 디투고레스 디니 디투 마루바이나 디니가 삼다 마루바인데 나베 소소라랑기 지 세디잠이 디기 세디잠 고거체 두스리아가라 제되거나 소소소소라야 고갑시우 레 여바디 고갑 말렘바체 소소소랑기 아니 고고다 소르다 디니가 소소고 고갑시우 레 여바디 렘마시 모바로 차고레 제자 디니 마임바체 디니 삽자체니 포지션이 냠네 제고레스 중고르타디 더디나
The meaning of this verse then is recognize this incredible opportunity we have each achieved, this opportunity that comes with having attained a hard-fought-for precious human rebirth, and commit to utilizing it to accumulate virtue and purify non-virtue, accumulate the causes required for higher rebirths, such as, or namely, ethics, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, and prayer. Strive for that, accumulate virtue, purify hindrances that would otherwise prevent it, and recognize whilst one is training that the sufferings of the lower realms, whilst must be averted, only present part of the sufferings of samsara. Even our own experience now shows us that the higher realms too are abodes of suffering, and generate a yearning to be freed of suffering and do all that's required, to no longer follow the desires for pleasures of this life, and no longer strive just to overcome this life's problems, but look beyond, maybe even look beyond samsara in its entirety, and thereby, in addition, cultivate concentration and wisdom. And as those minds grow within you, coming to see that liberation is possible, then turn your attention to the situation others find themselves in, that they too yearn for happiness, but are suffering. generate love and compassion for them, and develop that further into bodhicitta, and thereby also once again engage in the meditations on generosity, ethics, patience, joy, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. All of this training is possible for all of us because we have achieved this remarkable human rebirth. So therefore, commit to no longer deceiving oneself, to no longer stealing your future from yourself, but rather commit to striving for these great goals.
Danjo Duen Chawa said Chagurwa, Chesna, Danju Dinigi, Yamnichi, Kov Yudi Kapla, down the Danju Duen Chawasum, Danju Milipe, Cedelia, Tabata Tamji Gimbo Govan Toya, and Jiggy Gawachon, one Dio Govan Toya, Shenlia, Pember Duyaga, Chesna, got a two in the Nigi, Troop Tuyaki, Din Chabach and Chado, Chesna did Dindi, Dunda Chimbu, Din Dende. Yachimushu to 2 year body, 2 year baza, Dindi Duen Chawari, that you Duen Chawari, as such. Sungura didn't imagine that you don't charge that, then you didn't talk about Gapdelia, Gavadini, Sai, Govia, Gavasa, said, then you don't charge the Sungua. This in Kasan Nima de Shade, and to get military position top calculation better as I should, then Juniaka was a Bilamina so that, then Juniaka, that then you don't charge said Chagor Dinama.
In terms of the lama, we're continuing as we were last week to look at the presentation of this precious human rebirth. So last week we looked at the great difficulty in attaining a precious human rebirth and this illustration of the turtle. Now we looking at the precious human rebirth presentation from the perspective of its great value. That the great value or potential of this rebirth is that we can accumulate the causes that will lead to further excellent rebirths, accumulate the causes that will even lead to liberation and enlightenment, and thereby be of great, meaningful benefit to others. All of this is possible for us. All of this is within our hands because we have this precious human rebirth.
Diva Saba in a DB Devo Nanson like Yungure, says an answer in the Duma Badme Yungure. Diva Shaje, Nimbo Tupshi Tinje, Kawa Saba in that, says that Nanson Kig Mare, says that Nanson Magana, and Dentally Kiri, says that Dushin Tarpatam Yoko, the Saure, says the shade, Dang Dusha, some night, says that Nanson Gedi, Dang Dunga, Ganga din Shiobare, says that the Gudi, that Karlikin Chesson, Diva Saba in the Yungu, Asebi, that is it. That D Gumtend, some Danagia, Sanya Jumnendi, Dingy Chor, so while some time, Sanji Garson, Dunga Shebacha, Gaza Dunga Bawacha, and the Kunju Shebacha, says Dunga said, and also Dunga the Hagores, Dunga Hagona, Dunga Yudi Hago check, says that Kunju, Yomo, but and Diva, Yomo, but says this in the douche in some dinner, some Davida, Delia, and Yanti. Delia Jaya Yobache, Chesa, Dunga Serkasum, Dunga, some decaded good, Gutiva Sabalit, Kigor, Sedu, Kunju Shabu, Kunju the Shaba Chow, Chagua. Chesa that Dela Yimbo to Shugan, Pangure, Sedu, Chesa that Yimbo to Shugan, Lamgombacha, said the Casore, go on the Lamgombacha, said Siguro, Chesa, Yimbo to Shugan, Pat, and the Mansole, Taria, the Tabdi Carelana, there's a Targo, Tarna, and the Garcia, the Taria Tandalaya, and the Diva Shawore, Nimbo to Shukone Shawore, said, Undusine, Pajic, Undus, Denige, some time you tone, when the Dingy to Radia, some time you something, some time you live a Shawore.
The results of non-virtue is rebirth in the lower realms with intense suffering. So if we apply ourselves to purification, we will not be born in the lower realms, but will be reborn again in the higher realms. So this comes about independence on causes. Independence on wholesome causes, desired results come. Dependence on unwholesome causes, suffering follows. And the great liberating power of understanding dependence arising is that we come to recognize that our desired result is attainable. It depends that our desired result depends on accumulating the required causes and abandoning contrary causes. This understanding of dependent arising gives us confidence that we can change the trajectory of our lives. And here too, I encourage you to engage in reflection on the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha taught that suffering needs to be known. We need to come to recognize suffering in our lives, not just the obvious cause levels, but the subtler ones, so that we have a deep desire to gain freedom. And then we will seek out, what are the causes? Why is it that I keep suffering? And those causes then need to be abandoned. Buddha also taught that true cessations need to be attained, and that is done through cultivating true paths. So therefore, in the process of accumulation and purification, include meditation on the Four Noble Truths.
Nene gewa tarba da gewa ngondio gewa chima ngondio gowa thoya da tarba tamji gewa gowa thoya de gewa lam nyamne gewa druba dela tene yungur mado gewa di ma druba ne yungur ma res tene yungur 제가 누우신 tene 중국에 봐 되네게 삼다이데 제가 다 나송기 누가세야 되기 규단见了 마도 봐 라고는 줍디에 누가지요 마 미도아스 삼다이다 tarba 탐지 김be 고바세도 규단见현실의 되네 주모도 강라에 마도 봐 라고는 줍디에 tarba 탐지 김be 야 민도아스 배 삼다도스 삼다데 현지 된진 제외주의 삼다이데 다지게 되네게 삼다네 강한 규단见 강라에 마도 봐 라고는 줍디게다 야와세다 누가세 자오기는 민도아스면 삼다이 아직 된진 제와주의 삼다네 야 동바이 삼다이 가 리오로 봐 두신다지 제가 되니기 직송요 되갑라 담이 지게 냠네 야고유 한다就是되니 김제 망고 되니 직송 되니기 어디로 와서 김제 망고 지 된투고다 나한쪽이 다 장도 셰메디 김제 충주 지라직마도 하고 두고 말봐 제가 되니시네 제가 데데레야 아니 지게 또 송에데 데라 되네 윤지게 된제 임바 윤지게 된데 임바 된네 된신 전시를 되는 주바자 현강来마되바 랑원 주바디 매바 아니 되네자네 개와디 미개와디 가서 동안에 유 디바 임바 개와 가서 달 대와디게 유 아니 개와 임바 되네시네 이제 denxin naxin chiada denxin zhawa juan samdayada na dongbani samdayada yunjige denjige samdaya ani jige odusin denxin nilu samdaya dinaxin gedik langdore samdaya chazada denjige samdaya mangbo shuji da janju sembada denjige mizo nyamnen nadu dizik mangbo gyumje mangbo samdaya gyumjen cho 강에 mangbo samdaya denjige samlo dile nigo shuchi ya ani jige gewan maso geche sa to yungorwa.
And I encourage you to take these verses we've looked at tonight, as well as what we continue to look at, and approach them in the way that I'm guiding you in our class, but also call to mind the teachings we've had previous to this. Because the way a real practitioner, a bodhisattva, would approach any practice, such as this, for example, is the topic would be, as it is here, precious human rebirth. So that meditate on the precious human rebirth in the way that's advised, seeing it's so difficult to achieve and it's how rare it is and its great value. And then through going through those steps of the meditation, that may be the explicit meditation they're engaging in, but they would call to mind many topics, recognizing that all beings want happiness and to be free of suffering. Happiness is a result that comes about in dependence on virtuous causes. It's a dependent arising. Suffering, too, is a result that comes about in dependence, but on non-virtuous causes. It, too, is a dependent arising. Being dependent arisings, they do not exist in the way that they appear as truly existent, but are empty of existing truly. This means virtuous causes can be accumulated, or to express it differently, virtuous habituations can be cultivated because they are empty of inherent existence. So too, non-virtuous habituations, these can be broken too, because these have just come about in dependence on deep familiarity with a particular way of thinking, and therefore they are empty. Therefore, they can be eradicated. So here we see how a skilled practitioner will be reflecting on the harmony of dependence arising and emptiness, whilst reflecting on the precious human rebirth. The explicit meditation remains precious human rebirth, but I encourage you to bring your other Dharma knowledge into these meditations. Likewise, one can reflect on cause and effect, what the wholesome causes that are required, the unwholesome causes to be avoided. Certainly reflect on the results that follow, the desired results to give you a determination, the undesired results to also give you determination. And reflecting like this, particularly on dependence arising, will lead to the understanding that we are not helpless. We may feel that our mind is uncontrolled, that we keep making the same mistakes, but because these are nothing more than dependent arisings and therefore empty, we can change our habituation. And moreover, of course, in these reflections, one will reflect on the various causes to be cultivated, generosity, ethics, and so forth. And one can also use this as a basis to generate bodhicitta. So a skilled practitioner, when meditating on precious human rebirth, whilst that will be the focus of their reflection, will call to mind all the various topics. And in that way, a meditation on precious human rebirth is not something to be dismissed as for beginners, as a simple practice. But a skilled practitioner will relate to such a topic in an extensive as well as a profound manner.
top delia da nganzo geshe dipong giru kare jina je tuye tin kyaba jin top de yore jisan dirin goga byangbu tunyen chasan nangi tunyen rang ngone tunyen chasan sawa chi gone tunyen chasan sawa de ba de ya nganzo ge anjige sem ba mege wonto mata ji ba ye den je ane jige ma sa bi diba dige pa anjige mo kaso nyimbo topju gone shaya da ane sosugi gyabo 총모다 총모라 미림바데 징인다 총모라 치침벨라 미림바데게 강도도 소소라게 두신 배주의제는 냐면 제고레스 되네게 마제바이나 다 되네게 하나들야 고갑디 바지고 헐 제태제 경시우라고 그래스 지난 되네 자디 냐면 제어디 예침무시고레스 아직도나 님보다 뒤샤나 되네제.
So in brief, remind yourself of this incredible precious human rebirth you have achieved, and do so in the sense, not just as a mere recognition, but so that a feeling of how truly fortunate I am. I have all the required inner and outer conditions in order to achieve something remarkable with whatever remains of this life. So therefore, I need to purify my mind from harmful habituations through relying on the four opponent powers, and strive in habituating my mind to virtuous ways of thinking, such as ethics, generosity, and so forth. This is the potential that I can achieve in this life. Not to do so would be a great loss. So therefore, I commit to striving to cultivate wholesome minds within. So then thank you. We can conclude there for tonight. If you have some questions, then feel free to ask. Then thank you very much.